basically a zoo of these candidates, and none of them are striking any kind of chord with the American public. You saw a glimmer of hope from Herman Cain, but of course this week brought news that he's got his own problems to deal with, including these allegations of sexual harassment, which, you know, stem from 15 years ago. To me, it was very much like watching what happened to Clarence Thomas those many years ago.
But Clarence Thomas, the complaint was real live, real bad.
We all watched it. It was political drama.
That's right. Let me take you in another direction. I don't know if you heard the rumor or not, but Rand Paul says that he might do the Ross Perot thing and actually run as an independent. What do you think?
I think he will probably get a lot of public sentiment in his favor, but come election day, how many people will actually get out and vote for him? I don't know. And but what kind of impact that will have?
It will affect Republicans.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make.
Barack Obama will become the president the second time.
I think that those people that remember Ross Perot and the influence he had on the election back then, he led to Bill Clinton winning the presidency because he took votes away from George Bush. And the same thing threatens to happen if he does do that. There's a part of me that would welcome something to shift and change and toss up this election cycle and make it more interesting.
You know, all things considered, I listened to Rand Paul, and I can tell you, he made a lot of sense. He made a lot of sense. He says, when President Obama comes up and says, I am going to give you as much loan as you want, just go to college. He says, the same thing that they did as a bubble, I'll get you a house, doesn't matter, I'll give you a loan. And all of that bubble popped, and now the education bubble is popping. So he says it's now fair for people who are very poor, don't want to go to college, but their tax money is being used to send somebody else to college. Some of the arguments that he was making, I was really interested in it.
What you're finding is that we've lived with these bubbles for decades. But until our times got tough, we never realized how many bubbles there were. But there seem to be bubbles in real estate, in education, in healthcare, in Social Security. They're everywhere. And until our times really change, we're not going to make those underlying foundational changes that really improve our well-being.
All they're doing is putting Band-Aid. Every single day, President Barack Obama comes up with an idea. It's nothing but a Band-Aid. You know, we're a country of thinkers. We could come up with a long-term plan and not tinker with it one bit for the next 20 years or 30 years.
Speaking of bubbles, there's also evidence now that our biggest financier, China, may be experiencing its own kind of bubble. This is a very interesting article out of Time magazine about how China very much resembles all the problems that the U.S. has. Let me read you a couple of statistics here. 24% is the estimate of China's contribution to economic growth in the year 2011. In other words, the entire sum of global growth, 24% of it was owned by China, which is a phenomenal number. But get this. There are over $500 billion in land sales in the year 2010, which is double what it was in 2009.
That's right.
In other words, land and real estate is a big boom economy right now in China, but it has some of the same perils that the U.S. economy has. They're growing basically too fast. They got
buildings that are sitting empty. They have no lights up there, no people up there, but everybody's rich because they have the property.
They have real estate. There's been a 33% increase in Chinese investment in real estate this year compared with 2010. So year over year, they're doubling, tripling some of their real estate investments. In fact, in order to sustain this, they need over a 7% annual growth rate, which so far China seems to be enjoying, largely because of its import-export business. But look at this quote from China's own premier, Wen Jiabao, who says his nation's economy is very unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. And that's why Beijing has already figured out that it needs to shift away from old export and building boom models to one that relies more on domestic demand for goods and services. But just like the U.S., what you find in China is a disparity between the rich and the poor. The fact that there aren't very many high-paying, high-level jobs for this new population, which seems to be coming out in droves. Now, China doesn't have India's problem, which is that they don't have a lot of young people entering the workforce. But at the same time, those that are rich are getting richer, and those that are at the bottom of the barrel are not finding their way into the economy.
That is so true.
And so that lopsided behavior and nature of the Chinese economy means that down the road, perhaps even in as much as a decade or two, you're going to see China go through the same kind of boom bust that we're going through now. And this is scary for the U.S. because so much of our money comes from China.
No, $2.9 trillion is the cash they have. So they may be able to write it out, you know, not like America. We have to borrow more money. In fact, there was an interesting opinion in Financial Times about China. It says anybody who's thinking that reshoring will work, which means that yes, a little bit of salaries will go up in China. Somehow it'll be competitive. So the jobs will come back to America. I'm a believer in that. Yes, that can happen. But the urban factory worker, 34 million of them, probably make $2 an hour. You know, compare that with 64 cents an hour if they're working in agriculture. All right? And that is 65 million people that do that. And then another 650 million people, even less than 64 cents an hour. I mean, that's the country they have. World Bank did a study that said one American worker is worth 12 Chinese workers. Did you know that?
I knew it would be something along those lines, but 12 is a high number.
Yeah. And so they're saying reshoring, don't wait on reshoring. Don't think of reshoring.
Because it's not a one-to-one. It's not as if the one job you lose overseas equates to one job back home.
That's right. It's
you
like 1 in 8.
12 jobs overseas in China to make up for the one job back home. Well, you know, this just speaks to the problem I was mentioning earlier. Just to show you how much the world has changed in China. You know, we've always thought of counterfeit goods sometimes coming from China in terms of bags, handbags, Gucci, but it wasn't really Gucci because it came from China. Well, the reverse is happening. The Chinese are very careful. They don't want the fake item. They don't want the knockoff. They want the real thing, and they are rich enough now to go after it. So what are they doing? They're hoarding it. And because they're hoarding it, these providers of these luxury goods are soaring. And that's why you have all of these high fashion manufacturers doing extremely well in China right now.
That's true.
Meanwhile, the rest of the world are finding those prices jacked up because the Chinese are basically in that market and hoarding all the goods there.
That's very true.
So it's just amazing how quickly the Chinese and the consumer power in China has evolved right to the luxury goods items.
Yeah, but how do you do this? You know, manufacturing jobs are the middle America. And we have been suffering because those jobs have been flying since 1995 out to China. But today, what are you going to do? Where are the jobs going to come from? Yes, I understand President Obama says new technology, new energy, new this, new that. But how about the old things? I don't really think if you make underwears here, there's somehow Chinese sell it cheaper